but American Army of Missionaries who bring the gospel. And starting this meeting with friend of mine, with Joshua Green, I would like to have a prayer of blessing upon him, that God will anoint him for this very important sin in our government. I believe that all of us, we are praying, first of all, what we do in our spiritual battle. We pray for our country, we pray for our government, and we pray for the future godly candidates who come to these offices and will be leading our nation, leading our state in the right direction. And in this prayer, we'll remember those who serve for our country, for those who lay down their souls and their bodies. The Bible says there is no more greater love than to lay down your soil. There is no more greater love to lay down your soul for your friends. Going to public service, to become a servant for people like Joshua Green, the people who lay down their everything. So I'd like to start our meeting with a prayer of blessing for our country, in remembrance of those who serve and serving now, protecting us, protecting our country, our freedom, our constitution, and our constitutional liberty. And we'll pray for candidate for governor, Joshua Green. Let's bow down our heads and our hearts before the God. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, with the honor and glory for your love, Lord. Thank you for your love that you show us till now, until this day, Lord, that we are free, that we can stand and freely in the heart of our state, worship you, bow down our heart, and remember everything what you did, Lord. And you're doing your work through your servants, through your ministers, Lord, who serve for your people in our state and in our country, Lord. And this service, Lord, this meeting will start with a prayer of blessing upon our friend Joshua Green, that may the wisdom and your anointing will be upon him, that you will open up our hearts to hear the cry of the state of our nation, Lord. So may your freedom, may your protection, may your blessing, and may your light will shine upon this country to serve it for all nations, Lord, because this country and this nation is the blessing for the whole earth, Lord. And we pray for your blessing on this meeting, so may the wisdom and the words will come from our friend Joshua Green. Lead him, Holy Spirit. We give you glory and praise, and we remember all those who already serve and serving now on different fields, on different missions for our nation, for our country, protecting us, Lord, and serving in the different level of ministry, Lord. We give you praise and glory for them. Please bless them and their families, Lord, maybe who's grieving, comfort them by the Holy Spirit. We worship you because you are the Lord of our hearts. Thank you. Amen.
Is this working out all right for you guys? All right, so it's not too loud or too. Well, so my campaign's obviously been focusing on the future, what we're going to do for Washington State, looking at the things that are happening around our state and some of the evidences of the governor's failures around us when it comes to rise of crime and homelessness and a lot of issues that are going on. And at the base of our decisions is the Constitution. And Bill is here and is a strong supporter of the Constitution and wants to see that we are moving our state forward on a great positive way or direction, right? So Bill has some thoughts for us all.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if anybody's here seen me talk before, but I am all about the Constitution. And just so it's known, I'm not running for office. I'm not an attorney. I'm not anything to deal with actual politics in itself, except for I am a patriot, I am a veteran, and I am a business owner. And so some of the things that I actually like to cover is dealing with what our rights are. So one of the things, that I want to go ahead and make sure that I make clear, I'm actually with what's called American Revolution 2.0, which is a fairly new group. And we've made so much traction, honestly, that Facebook shut down 51 of our pages, honestly, only after 4 weeks of being in existence. So that kind of tells you, you know, the kind of thing we're doing, but we're doing it all with education. Now, I'm not actually even advocating that we do anything about overthrowing our government. I think we have a good government, okay, structure. We just have wrong people that are actually leading it. So there's several things, you know, several reasons why that I think that we're all here. And that is to find a peaceful way to be able to take back our government and hold our actual politicians accountable for what they're doing. And the only way we can do this is to actually have educated people. There we go. Is that a little bit better? Okay. So today there's topics and things that I want to talk about that compile of many aspects of previous talks that I've done. Now, I've been asked by several people, because I am a business owner, that I should tell them that they can go open their business. And I've told them very frankly that I can't tell them that, because I'd be no better than Inslee telling them how to run their business. But what I do tell them is they do have a right to open their business. And it's not going to be basically free. You may get harassed, but you have to stand your ground. One of the things I want to talk about is the RCW that Inslee always wants to use to go and say he has a right to go and shut down the actual economy here in Washington. And it's known as 43.06.220. Now, this RCW is quoted not just by Inslee, but it's also quoted by many of the leaders of each party that's in our legislators. Now, the one thing that we need to go ahead and understand is that an online dictionary that talks about a proclamation, it actually does say that the only actual person that can give a proclamation that can be enforced by penalties is the United States President. Now, that's not my words. That's actually coming from a legal dictionary online. But sadly, even elected officials, namely the party leaders in Washington State, have quoted this RCW as the reason that governor has the right to shut down, the state. This RCW heading does read, State of Emergency, powers of the governor, pursuant of a proclamation. Now, while this may sound like that he has a right to go and say that everybody can shut down, let me go and read some sections out of that. Section 1 says, the governor, after proclamation, a state of emergency and prior to terminating such, may, in the area described by the proclamation, issue an order prohibiting, and it says, any person being on public streets or in public parks or at public places. I want to make sure I say it exactly right here. And it goes on to read, during the hours declared by the governor to be period of curfew. Now, of course, it can be assumed that that means 24 hours a day, but most people understand a curfew is at a certain time. Section B says a number of persons as designated by the governor for assembly or gathering on public streets, parks, or other areas of the state, either public or private. Now, that one's kind of questionable because it has the word private in there. I'm going to skip to actually C and D because it talks about bombs. And I don't think any of us actually are thinking about any kind of a bomb. But it goes on with E, and it says the sale, purchase, or dispersing of alcoholic beverages. Well, those are still going on. Now, of course, he doesn't have to do all of these at once, so he can kind of pick and choose which ones he's going to enforce. But it's kind of ironic that that's actually listed in there as one of them. Then it goes on with F, the sale, purchase, or dispensing of other commodities or goods as he or she reasonably believes should be prohibited to help preserve and maintain life, health, property, or public peace. Now, that does not talk about anything to do with service. So any company that has a service that they provide, this doesn't apply to them because they're not doing a commodity. Going on, it says the use of certain streets, highways, or public ways by public or let's see, just going on to the section H now, just had the word in. Such other activities, and this is one that kind of bothers me the most. For such activities as he or she reasonably believes should be prohibited to help preserve and maintain life, health, property, or public peace. So let me go ahead and point out the very first sentence and how it's unconstitutional. First of all, we are a democratic republic. You don't see the word democrat anywhere in our Constitution. It says republic, and that's not by mistake. So there should never be a single person controlling you. And this law starts out by saying the governor, after easy for me to say, proclamating a state of emergency. Now, I'm not an actual lawyer, so I'm not going to say exactly what that could mean. But I'll tell you what, it sounds like that one person can say what you can do after he says that he's going to say he can say what he can do. So the question becomes, what can we do about it? Well, there are several facets that are required action. We have to start with the root cause of the unconstitutional actions of any government action, or of any government agency. And I'm talking about the need to search out the knowledge of the country founding fathers and the laws put in place to protect our rights. And here's a few. First of all, most people may not realize that our country was set up under what's called a Lex Rex, law system. And those are Latin terms. Now, Lex is actually laws. Rex is actually kingship or leader. Now, it's not by mistake that we have them in that order, because as our Constitution even says, that everybody is under the same law, the law of the land, which is known as the U.S. Constitution. Now, there are other countries that run under a Rex Lex, which is like England is over to have a kingship, so they're a whole lot different in the way that they're actually looked at. There's a reason why that we have the Constitution. I'm going to go ahead and cover this one last thing, and then I can talk to anybody afterwards, because there's a whole lot more information that I can cover. But under the Washington State Constitution, under Section 2, it's titled as Supreme Law of the Land, and it has one sentence after it. The Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. So anytime that someone wants to say an RCW tells you you can't do it, you have to look at it and understand that the Washington State Constitution is above that RCW. Then once you understand the Washington State Constitution is above the RCW, you have to understand the United States Constitution is above that. And we do have, the 14th Amendment that says that all laws must be applied equally. And for some reason, we're not doing that here. So I'll be around. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, Ryan Ingram, running for state rep, sir. A few minutes to say hello, introduce yourself.
Yeah, congressional. Oh, why not? That's all right.
Congressional.
We'll be here working together.
For you.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks for having me out here. This guy's a great guy. I met Josh, I think, a couple months ago. You know, he's been an awesome person. Learned a lot from him. I think he'd be a great governor here for the state of Washington. I want to thank him for having me out here today. Thank you for having me out here today, everybody. It's good to see everybody today on Memorial Day. Yeah. Did anybody go out to any cemeteries today? We were putting flowers on cemeteries this morning. It's a good thing to get into. But anyways, so today on Memorial Day, one of my favorite things, what I like to call it, is it's more of a celebration for me. So I'm a veteran. I was stationed here at JDLM for a while as a company commander. I got a small business, you know, all those things. But you know, once you get out of the military, you realize how much you miss it. You also realize how important this day is for our rights and our freedoms here in this country. We have fought a lot of wars. We've fought a lot of wars here in this country. We've fought a lot of wars outside of this country. A lot of people have lost their lives, as we know. And it was so that we could have our freedoms today. Freedoms that Bill was talking about earlier. Those are important to us, and we need to continue to fight to have those. So continue to do what you need to do so that we can stay free out here. so that we can have people that actually can run for governor instead of having a government tell us who runs for governor. That's important for us. That's why we do what we do. That's why you guys are all out here today, and I want to thank you for that. So, yeah, again, I'm Ryan Ingram. I'm running for Congress here in Washington's 10th Congressional. So whoever gets into this office right here, I look to be helping out at a federal level here in Olympia and Tumwater and Puyallup and all those other places. So if anybody would like to talk to me, you can talk to me. I'm going to be over here hanging out. You can visit me at ryanforcongress.com. Thank you very much. I'm going to give it off to Joshua.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. And, another gentleman, Mike, with American Revolution, is going to come up and share for a couple minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. I'm actually not with American Revolution. I'm just a private citizen. I come up here to the Capitol quite a bit and attend these rallies and try to stand up for freedom. Can you speak louder, please? Yeah. Is that better? All right. I just like I love my country. I like to talk about the Constitution. And I may be preaching to the choir a little bit here this morning, but I just want to briefly talk a little bit about both the Washington State Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. Topic here, state powers, from where they derive. Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution establishes the legislative branch. Article 2 establishes the executive branch. Article 3 establishes the judicial branch. What many people think that I speak with is that the Constitution also establishes the rights and freedoms of the people of America. That's not the case. So all of those three branches are ordained by the people and derive their powers from the consent of the governed through the U.S. Constitution. I'm going to read the preamble to the Bill of Rights here. The conventions of a number of states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. Then the Bill of Rights goes on to talk about the rights of the people. It doesn't grant them, simply makes promises that the government won't infringe on them or try to restrict them. I think it's important that everybody understands that. These are rights that we're born with. They're God-given, unalienable rights. They're not granted by the government, can't be taken by the government unless we give them up freely. Our local, state, and federal governments now seem to think that they have inherent powers that are greater than those of the people, something we all need to guard against. Washington State Constitution.
My friend,
Yes,
how about 30 more seconds?
I'll make it quick.
All right.
Article 1, Section 1. All political powers inherent in the people and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and are established to protect and maintain individual rights. That's their job, maintain individual rights.
Yes.
When they try to do, when they stomp on those rights, in the name of something else, they're not representing us. They're not doing their job. I just want to encourage everybody here, if you don't have a copy of the Constitution on you, a hard copy, you don't own one, go buy two. One for you to read, one for you to share with a friend. Thank you very much for your time. Joshua Freed.
So a bunch of my staff here are riding around, obviously in the wonderful tin real estate truck, thank you Troy Anderson, and also in my Tahoe, but everywhere we looked, we kept on finding a copy of the Constitution. It's amazing how many are out there. But I've had an opportunity to meet many great people, all of you certainly standing here over the last several months, and one person I have really very much enjoyed getting to know, who does a phenomenal job representing us here in Washington State, is Representative Kelly Chambers. And so she is up for re-election this year, and her and her husband Jeff have become dear friends of mine and Lindy's, and they brought their fuzzy little friends along with them too. But this is Kelly Chambers.
Okay, the most important person here today, this is Chewy Chambers. doesn't know what his mama's up to. Twinkle, come here. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Chambers. I'm happy and honored to represent the 25th Legislative District in Puyallup and Pierce County. So thank you all so much for being here today on this Memorial Day as we honor and pay tribute to those men and women that served our country and laid down their lives so that each one of us can sleep under the blanket of freedom every night in this country and feel safe in doing so. You know, I'm so glad that Joshua Freed is running for governor. We've had 30 years of essentially one-party rule in Washington, and it's time for a different kind of leadership here. So thank you for stepping out and having a vision for our state and in a way that we can do things better that allows us to exercise our right to freedom and to pursue life, liberty, and happiness in Washington. So I support Joshua Freed. I'm so glad that you're here today, and thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. I really appreciate it. Chewy Chambers.
He has a Facebook page.
He does, probably. A lot of people follow him. But it's so fun to look around the crowd here. Thank you so much for coming out today as we mourn certainly the loss of life, but also celebrate the same freedoms that we're able to enjoy because of those who we've lost. But hopefully you've had an opportunity to go by a couple of the memorials here and just have a time of remembrance and prayer. Thank you so much for all of you who have served in the military. Appreciate the freedom that we have today because of freedom, or because of the sacrifice that you've given to be able to make sure that we can even stand here on these steps. It's been an interesting last 8 weeks, hasn't it? Yeah, for sure. As we've been under a stay-at-home order, and it started, as voluntary. We were all willing to stay at home and make sure that we're keeping each other safe and our families safe, and we're working together as one, right? But I think that really took a very dark turn about 3 weeks ago when the Attorney General stood with the governor and said, we're going to start enforcing these stay-at-home orders. So if you see somebody going to their non-essential job and you're on your way to your essential job, pick up the phone, call the government, and we're going to take away their business license, we're going to fine them, and even put them into jail. That's not what Washington State is all about. Washington State is about the freedoms of which we've enjoyed since the beginning, right? And now we're in a place where we're having, under penalty of perjury or penalty, that we're going to actually face crimes we're actually trying to go to provide for our families. And the message is consistent and clear as we go across Washington State, as we're hearing from different businesses and individuals that their families are extremely hurting. A dear friend of mine is delivering food to about 200 families here up north in Pierce County every week, as people are facing very difficult times because the governor has declared that they cannot work. And we have the freedom to work, yet he's been making these arbitrary decisions, whether you're essential or non-essential, using very deceptive dials that I don't think are scientific, and they're certainly unproven. And yet he's using those as dictates on how we're supposed to be able to go about our day. And so during this period of time, as he's declaring essential and non-essential, he's letting pot shops be open and liquor stores be open, and you can go to Costco or Walmart. He's shutting the small stores. Yet across Washington State, as Evan and I and my team have been traveling around, we're going into small towns that are just starting to open. I think as Jay Inslee squeezes his fist tighter and tighter and tighter, he's losing the grip across Washington State. He certainly lost touch with the citizens that he said he would represent. When he made the statement just about 4 weeks ago that this is really hard work, he wished it wasn't on his shoulders, he wish it was on somebody else's. Well, it's time for him to step aside because we need new leadership in Washington State. It's heartbreaking as you consider that we have the highest unemployment rate in the nation, 30%. We are number one of all the states in the nation. Now, of course, some people are wondering how much of that is contributed to by the fraudulent movements that have happened. I don't know if you heard about this, but hundreds of millions of dollars of payments have gone out to a Nigerian group committing fraud, taking away these unemployment checks from people that are suffering today in Washington State. Families that are looking to make a decision whether they go to work. The signs are flying now. They'll get it. Oh, this is fun. The wind is blowing in Washington. It's time. The winds of change are right here at the Capitol, I think. But the message certainly is consistent and clear in Washington State. People want to reopen, and they want to do it in a way that's responsible. And we're seeing this already. I mean, folks that are looking at the decision whether they're going to shut down their business that they've been running their entire life, it's their livelihood. And the governor's saying, no, you need to stay at home. But we're in this together. Yet, if you look over here to your left, my right, you can see that we have a mansion we pay for him. He sits behind a high wall, and he continues to collect the salary. Yet many people are not receiving their unemployment checks in their highest unemployment in the land. People are literally looking across the table and looking at their kids who they're not able to provide food for. There's a lawsuit right now that's going to be heard tomorrow at 3 o'clock in Yakima. The plaintiff is now, he's taken on 2 to 3 jobs. He looks across the table at his kids, and they've been living on top ramen for the last several weeks. That's the reality of what's happening in Washington State. Now, I live on top ramen normally because I like top ramen. But the point is that we have people that are in absolute poverty in a typical environment or an economy, that you're seeing that people are living paycheck to paycheck. Yet today, in the highest unemployment in the land, Jay Inslee is literally killing Washington, and we're watching it happen before us. But you people who believe in freedom want to stand up for that freedom, and that's the message that we took across the state, that it's time for us as a people to rise up and take our state back before it's too late. We've been waiting for 35 years. There's been 35 years of a Democrat controlling the governor's mansion, and with it you see a rampant increase in crime, you see a rampant increase in taxes and spending. Just last year in the legislative session here in the House and in the Senate, they're on the floor at midnight passing a state budget that increased spending by 17%. They increased taxes by $2.7 billion, while we're, of course, trusting state government. And they did it by using a tool called a title-only bill. It's a white piece of paper, and they amend the white piece of paper at midnight with $2.7 billion in new taxes. We need a governor who truly understands that we need to cut state government. After 35 years of one-party control of the governor's mansion, then he gets to make 1,500 appointments consistently. All the governors have. So the size of state government has exponentially grown. And so that burden is just on the back of all the taxpayers in Washington State. It's time that we cut state government by at least 25%. So we can retain more of our money. We know in a time of crisis, waiting for the government to provide for the needs that we have is not the way that we should be running our state. It's best to leave the money within our hands, the one who have made the money and work for that money, rather than look to state government continue to grow it. Under Jay Inslee, actually the budget has increased by 60%. All around us during just the last 7 years. It's unbelievable to see that. So we need fiscal responsibility. There's an insatiable appetite for taxing and spending that Jay Inslee has. So if we rein back in that control, if we let our voice be heard this November, then we can have a government that truly understands that we need to be focusing on the people, because it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's how I'll make sure that I am serving here in Washington State. Actually, as I serve as governor, I'm not going to take a salary, because it's important to me that the people of Washington State know that I'm here to serve in Washington or in Olympia, rather than truly try to live off what some people do. Some people get connected to special interests and they find opportunities through that, or they enrich themselves off the initiative process. I think that has gone on far too long. We need to turn that tide here in Washington. One thing that's extremely concerning to me, and I know that you've seen it as well, and as I travel around the state, I know how prevalent it is, but it's the rampant increase in homelessness. And it's driven by what I call unaddressed mental health issues and, of course, drug and alcohol addiction. We see that 30% of homeless are struggling from mental health issues, because in July 2018, Western State Hospital was decertified by the federal government. They actually came in, they looked about and saw it was dangerous for the caregivers as well as those receiving care. And now 30% of the homeless, the most vulnerable among us, are struggling from mental health issues that are not being addressed. As a mental health counselor myself, I counseled for many years, actually in King County. All the kids that started fires, I used to counsel them, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, these young pyromaniacs who would burn down houses, something was consistent. 90% of their parents, their fathers, were in jail. And so we need to start attacking what's going on there, making sure that we're keeping people safe, and reestablish a mental health program in Washington State that keeps people safe. But the number one contributor to homelessness in Washington State is drug and alcohol addiction. We see that as drug culture continues to increase in Washington State, so does crime. Lindy and I got involved in running Initiative 27 2 years ago in King County. We saw that with the increase in the drug culture, they wanted to have what's called a heroin injection site. So Seattle City Council, King County Council wanted to have these places where if you're addicted to heroin, you walk in, you get the tourniquet for your arm, you get the needles, the syringe, you get the pan to cook your heroin in, even the matches. So everything to put poison within your veins. That's not a compassionate way to take care of those who are addicted to drugs or alcohol. So Lindy and I started Initiative 27. We got 70,000 signatures, 1,000 volunteers. And I work with this Neighborhood Safety Alliance, Speak Out Seattle, and Save Seattle. These are groups that typically would only work with the Democrat, and they were willing to work with the Republican. Right now, when we have such division in our state, you need a leader that's willing to work across party aisles to make sure that we can find common ground to address the pandemic that we're seeing, certainly in the rise of the drug culture. It is time that we can turn this state around. I believe that we can. But through it all, we actually got it qualified for the ballot, and then I had to come all the way here to the state Supreme Court to fight for our rights to have the initiative on the ballot. And yet, all 9 of those justices said that heroin injection sites were positive. But not one of them ever went up to Canada to see what Lindy and I did 5 different times, to go on the streets of East Hastings and see that the death rate from heroin has increased from 190 people in 2003 to last year's 1,750, an 800% increase. So clearly the normalization of the use in heroin is not the right direction to go. But we need to enforce our laws here in Washington State. So when I become governor, I'll actually declare a state of emergency on day 1. I'll pull in the Department of Transportation and the state troopers. We're going to clean up all the right-of-ways. Because we're seeing homelessness here in Olympia. We're seeing it in Seattle. We're seeing it in Seattle. We're seeing it in Federal Way. We're seeing it in Yakima, where they close the doors of the Chamber of Commerce during the middle of the day. And in Spokane, 3,000 homeless a night. And what's terrible is you see what happens with the rise of crime. 20% increase in assaults on individuals. A 40% increase on assaults on police officers. It costs $35,000 a year to support your heroin addiction. And so people are breaking into people's cars. They're assaulting people on the street. They're breaking into people's homes. And we need to restore safety and civility in Washington State. Because already under Jay Inslee in 7 years, we've seen murder increase by 41% and rape increase by 65%. The population's only increased by 7%. It's unbelievable what's happening around us, and it's like we've been sitting here and haven't recognized how quickly things have changed. But I have dear friends, maybe some of you even here, who voted Democrat just 3 years ago, and now they look at their own party, they don't even recognize it anymore. So by making sure that we restore order in Washington State, we can make a change. So under the Freedom Administration, if you're using heroin in the streets, as I've seen so many times, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to go to Pathways to Recovery. This is a new public-private partnership that I want to start. And what it looks like is we, the government, will provide underutilized government facilities like McNeil Island, like a couple locations in Yakima. I want to start with Evergreen State College. We've seen enrollment go down by 42% there. Yet they just spent...
Evergreen.
What?
Close down Evergreen. It's unprofitable.
Well, no, we're going to make it a Pathways to Recovery. So what it's going to be is the government is going to provide that location. We just spent $40 million on revamping student housing there. But it's just a failed social experiment. You don't even get grades there. So what I want to do is have nonprofits come in and finally provide people-on-people treatment. When government is doing treatment with detox and recovery, only a 20% success rate. Yet these nonprofits like UGM have an 80% success rate. So let's put people through detox, through recovery, through job training and apprenticeship programs so we can turn their lives around. We spend $1 billion a year in the homeless industrial complex, yet the problem only continues to get worse. So under a Freedom Administration, we're going to have the resolve. It's called compassionate enforcement, and we're going to turn our state around. Because what we're seeing today is not working for us. It's not working for our own personal security, and it's time that we have true compassion. I call it loving your neighbor. I think we're all called to love our neighbor. We're not called to just look on somebody unequally, but we're called to reach our hand down and reach them up and make sure that they get their life on a pattern or a path back onto self-sustainability. I don't know use that word very much, but we are making sure that we're fighting hard for you on my campaign, by the way, and we're always looking for more help. We have some envelopes over here that you can sign up on. You can volunteer for the campaign by making phone calls. You can send text out. You can grab a sign and put it up in front of your house. We'd love to have your help. You know, we cannot do this alone, but I think together there's nothing that we cannot accomplish. So with your help, we can move our campaign forward. I feel good about what the future has, but it's amazing. Just 2 months from now, we see the ballots are going to drop. And it's kind of unbelievable to think that we're already at this point in the campaign where the primary is upon us. So in order to get the news out there, we also have to raise funds, and that's just the fuel, the fire of any campaign. So if you're willing to contribute today, I'd love to have your help. You have t-shirts for anybody who contributes, and you can wear a Proud Freedom t-shirt. But I'd love to have you on Team Green. Obviously, my wonderful wife Lindy is here. We've been married for 23 years. You can see her waving out the back. And we have Simon over here, Caleb, Emily, Jeannie. We just are a family that's dedicated to service. Actually, several of you here have been with us in the Philippines, serving for the last 21 years. It's pretty awesome. We've been going to Kenya as well, drilling wells there for the Maasai or building health centers. But God has called us forward to serve today. And so my family is willing and excited to jump in. And thank you so much for many of you who have helped support me
Sanctuary policies in this state.
along the way. Sanctuary policies, I think, are evil. We've been made a sanctuary state here in Washington.
What concrete steps are you going to take?
Well, I would not allow the sanctuary state to be in place, and I'll let you know why. Because when you become a sanctuary state, we become a hotbed for the sex trade in Washington state. So the definition is 18-year-old and younger in the sex trade. So we actually have, on average age, 12-year-old boys and girls in the sex trade. That means we have 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids. That's something that you would think you'd see in Thailand or some third world country. So the most vulnerable among us are becoming victimized. It goes into what happened here at 2:08 in the morning when comprehensive sex education was passed. Even TVW put a disclaimer on the screen: content of explicit material is being discussed. So for adults at 2 in the morning, they have to have a warning. What about our 5, 6, 7-year-old kids? And it's all part of the agenda that moves from that, compromise these young, innocent minds, let Planned Parenthood be in the middle schools as the health provider, and then let 13-year-old girls get abortions without parents knowing it. It's why these very steps that Satan is walking up and down at during the session, because the devil is bold, right? But it's time for us to stand up right now in the gap for our kids, for our families, to protect their innocence. Say it again, sir.
Will you take legal action if elected governor against sanctuary cities like Seattle and other communities that are self-proclaimed sanctuary cities?
Yes, and we need an attorney general who actually stands up for the people rather than continue to sue the federal government. I'm happy to say I brought a legal suit against Jay Inslee and Bob Ferguson in federal court 3 weeks ago, and we went to and had our hearing. We had our hearing 2 weeks ago now, and we were in federal court on the phone. The judge, who was appointed by Bush, turns to the Attorney General and says, "Did your client, the leading law enforcer of the land, Jay Inslee, have the right to shut down our spiritual gatherings?" And he said no. So after 156 pages, after 4 different court documents, and 2 weeks of argument from the Attorney General and Inslee that they can enforce their arbitrary decisions against spiritual gatherings, he finally had to admit under oath, with the Constitution as the basis, that he does not have those rights. So we need to start using the courts to actually truly defend the people rather than politicize the courts. I would love to see these 9 justices actually be elected across the state in regions rather than just have a representative from 1 or 2 or 3 counties here on the west side. We need full representation across all of Washington state, because I can tell you that central and eastern Washington, as I consistently hear it, they do not feel represented. They feel that Jay Inslee just needs to go north and south on 50 miles on the I-5 corridor, and that they don't feel represented. It's time that we have a governor who truly looks in the eyes of those people that he says he wants to represent and is willing to step in the gap during a difficult time than this. We need a governor who spends more time in Yakima than he does in Iowa running for president. Any other questions? You've asked a couple. Anyone else?
What will you do about people like Shalma Sawant who want to drive Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon out of Seattle?
Well, Shauna Swant's independently elected there in Capitol Hill. I mean, socialism is on the rise in Capitol Hill and Seattle, but I can tell you the rest of the state is pushing against it. Dear friends of mine who voted Democrat their whole life don't even recognize their party anymore. They're not socialists, so we're inviting them in. We are a big tent party here in the Republican Party. It's a Reagan principle, right? If you agree with us 80% of the time, you're part of us. And thankfully, a lot of people are recognizing that fiscal conservative policies matter. They have a difference, because retaining more of our hard-earned dollars is what you need in time of crisis. Government has clearly grown far too large. We need to reduce the size of the government to make sure we give power back to the people. We have a Constitution that gives us that right, and or maintains that right. God ultimately gives us that right. But God is good, for sure. Yes, sir.
In regards to like the one law I was talking about that's pretty much all unconstitutional, what's your position on trying to clean that kind of stuff up?
Clean up the lines in the
The laws. but that are unconstitutional, such as the 43.06.
Oh yeah, I mean there are laws that have been written in the book. There's certainly an initiative, a gun initiative just passed recently as well that has many unconstitutional things in there. The thing that Jay Inslee does is he refers to the RCWs. The RCWs are just that. They are the code of Washington. The law of Washington is the state constitution. And so we need to make sure we're always referring back to the state constitution, of course, the U.S. Constitution, which is why I had victory in court against Jay Inslee, and I will have victory again in November when we run the election on November 3rd. Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for coming down here. Yes, sir.
You know, McNeil Island sits vacant. It's a perfect place for mentally ill people to be treated.
Yeah.
It's crazy that it sits vacant.
350 beds unused.
You can do that.
That is an underutilized government facility we should do today, for sure. Letting the most vulnerable among us wander the streets, dazed and confused, is not compassion. Actually, surprisingly, Chicago has an amazing program that surrounds these folks. They put them in a temporary hospital institution, help get them stabilized, maybe with medication, and then incrementally they have a plan and a goal to move these folks more toward independence, but always surrounding them with a sphere of influence. Here in Washington, we give 30 pills and let people out and don't surround them with a sphere of influence at all. That's heartbreaking for me. My own grandfather struggled for mental health issues. I used to serve on the King County Mental Health Advisory Board. It's something that's very important to me to make sure that we can turn around. Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that the top two on the ballot for the primary are the ones that have a chance to be elected?
That's right. So we actually have 36 people running for governor because Jay Inslee decided to make it free to file for governor. So we have some people like the Good Space guy and others that are basically running to advertise for their own companies. It's unbelievable how we're mistreating what should be a proper process. So it is the top two. So at this point, of course, I think it will be Jay Inslee and myself. It'd be fun if it was another Republican. So we'll see what happens. But we have to get out and vote. Some people say, how can we defeat King County? Because there's so much power there. That's only about 25% of the state's population. So when we, the people across all 39 counties, come out and vote, we can make sure that we turn the tide. I believe that Washington State is turning today. You saw in November that 9 out of the 12 advisory votes for the $2.7 billion in taxes were rejected in Washington State because all the counties came out to vote, right? We saw Referendum 88 rejected, which was racism and discrimination that Democrats were pushing forward. And then we also saw $30 gas tax passed. So fiscal responsibility is taking its move in Washington State. People look at Jay Inslee and realize that he's running for his third term and has not deserved it. Even recently, I met with the Republican Governors Association in D.C., and they said, Josh, your background, your experience, your issues perfectly match up against Jay Inslee in November. So they've not spent money in Washington State in a very long time. They're starting to spend money in Washington State today. Even the Democrat Governors Association has been doing posts on me because they recognize that I'm the biggest threat to Jay Inslee, and with your help, we can make sure that we overcome Jay Inslee in November. How will I implement? Working with Kelly Chambers for sure. She's a fiscal conservative folks, and we have Republican House members that really want to see that pushed through. Bob Ferguson played games to delay that implementation. But thankfully we passed as a people, so it's the responsibility of the governor to make sure that that becomes law immediately. And he's dragging his feet. Yes, in the back, ma'am.
Hi, I was wondering, what do you do for a living?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a real estate investor, so I've been doing land development and home building for 15 years, and I also served on Bothell City Council for 12 years and served as mayor there. I oversaw the largest revitalization of a downtown in Washington State with $450 million worth of private investment. And right now, what we need is economic recovery. We need somebody who truly understands what it takes to run a small business. Typically, 80% of the jobs in Washington or across the states are provided by small business. But in Washington State today, Jay Inslee is doing his best to kill small businesses. He's letting the big box stores be open that sell underwear and t-shirts, but he's letting the small box stores, or shutting down the small box stores, some of them will never reopen. So he's very arbitrary for sure.
You speak to the choir.
Good. Well, I'd love to have your help and support. We have 57,000 pages of regulations that stand 6 feet tall. When I become governor, I want to sunset those regulations every 5 years, because these stay on the books forever. Department heads that you see in these buildings all around here make dictates, even to orchards in eastern Washington. They're making dictates on farms that they've never even set foot on. We had lawmakers here in Washington State, maybe coming from Capitol Hill or Queen Anne, who have never been in an orchard or in a ranch, trying to make decisions, taking away water rights from essential needs that we have in Washington State. It's time for that to change. We need to make sure that legislature, folks that are elected across the state, have that power, not department heads to take away those rights. But yes, sir.
I just have a question about the phases, the opening. Phase 4, and the at-risk person like myself is stay home, stay safe until phase 4. So right now, I'm supposed to be not even out.
So the reopening of Washington State?
Yeah, and 65 and older is at risk, and you look across the openings, we're required to stay home, stay safe. That's the way it is.
Yeah, well, we have freedom in America. Thankfully, we have a constitution. We don't have a king. But it's very interesting. What's very interesting is Cuomo in New York even recognizes that the death rate from this is 0.1%. Now, I am a member of a party, and I personally am pro-life, meaning that I value human life. And so when we lose any human life, that's something that we mourn, certainly. And certainly on this Memorial Day, as we're mourning the lives that were lost, we still celebrate the freedom that we're able to enjoy. But I think about those folks that we have lost. We also need to recognize that they paid the freedoms for the freedoms that we can enjoy today. And we don't have dictates from a king, but we can have the freedom to go live our life in the way that we see fit. And I think it's going to take the voice of the people rising up to tell their leaders, whether it's the governor or the legislature or their Congress or certainly the congressmen and women, and also committee members or county council members, that we want to see our freedoms restored. Ultimately, I think they've always been there through the Constitution. We voluntarily laid them down, and it's time for us to speak up again, so it's not too late. Tom?
Yeah, you said you're personally pro-life. What does that mean? What's the designation of personally mean?
Personally, well, no. I mean, I believe that I am pro-life and believe in the sanctity of human life. I believe that we need to fight for the unborn child. Yeah.
So both publicly and personally?
Both publicly and personally. I know some people have taken the convenient route to say, well, I am personally pro-life. No, I believe that we need to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves.
Amen.
And that would be the unborn. Yeah. It's so interesting. At the same time, you got folks that are... Oh, repeat it. Okay. I don't know what I was just going to say. Oh, well. Any other thoughts or questions?
I don't have a question, but I just have a passing comment real quick. I don't need it.
Where's your next
I was overseas at 18 years old. I fought for my country, and that means that every citizen in this country has the right to speak their mind, like the New York Times yesterday calling the United States military racist. So if you hadn't heard about that, that was just yesterday. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you very much for your service. I sincerely appreciate it. God bless you. All right, well, I need your help as we go out from here. And I think for the Republicans that are here and those that are independent and those Democrats looking to come over to the Republican side, even for such a time as this, I look forward to the battle that's ahead. We have 6 weeks, until the ballots are dropped for the primary. I need all the help we can get, making phone calls, sending emails out, and working hard to make sure that we have victory for our campaign. But one last fun announcement. A reveal is coming. This is something that I promise I'm going to work on when I become governor. That we're going to bring the Sonics back to Seattle. All right, it's fun. We're looking forward to the journey ahead. But God bless you all, and God bless your day. And thank you so much for those of you who served. There we go. Bring the Sonics back to Seattle. We're going to fight for it. We're going to make it happen. God bless you all. Bill, thank you.